Get your hands off me." The words were a low growl, a desperate plea swallowed by the cavernous silence of the courthouse corridor. But what happened next wasn't a sound you could ignore. It was the sickening thud of a head hitting drywall, followed by the sharp, metallic crack of a police baton meeting bone. The officer, a bull of a man with a thick neck and eyes as cold and gray as river stones, snarled, "You speak when you're spoken to, dirtbag." He didn't see the figure in the tailored suit watching from the shadows of the alcove down the hall. He didn't know that his casual brutality had just sealed his fate. What you are about to witness is not just a story of one man's abuse of power, but the story of how a single, quiet act of defiance can bring a corrupt system to its knees. If you believe that justice should be blind and that no one is above the law, do me a favor right now. Smash that like button and subscribe to Beat Stories. You won't want to miss what happens when a man who was supposed to be a victim turns out to be the most powerful person in the room. Officer Jack Calloway moved through the Cedar Creek County Courthouse like a predator staking its claim. 25 years on the force had carved lines of cynical authority into his face and given him a swagger that bordered on belligerence. People got out of his way. Lawyers, clerks, even the occasional junior prosecutor would flatten themselves against the marble walls as he passed. His footsteps echoed with an unearned importance, a sound that demanded deference. The morning light, filtered through the grand, arched windows, seemed to bend around him, illuminating the cloud of his own self-importance. His arrest record was legendary, the highest in the precinct for 5 years running, a statistic he wore more proudly than his badge. He checked the gold watch on his wrist, a gaudy thing he'd confiscated from a drug raid years ago. He had 20 minutes before he was due on the stand to testify. Plenty of time for a cup of coffee and a little casual intimidation. He spotted District Attorney Evelyn Reed near the bustling coffee cart, her brow furrowed as she reviewed a stack of files in a worn leather portfolio. "Morning, Ev," he boomed, bypassing the line and pouring himself a coffee, splashing a bit on the floor without a second thought. "Ready to put another scumbag behind bars where he belongs?" Reed's smile was a thin, practiced line. It didn't reach her eyes. "It's a simple possession charge, Jack, not the crime of the century. And you should know, Judge Thorne is presiding today." Calloway took a loud slurp of his coffee, scalding his tongue but refusing to show it. "Thorne? Never heard of him." "He just transferred from the Southern Circuit a few months back," she explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He has a reputation. They say he's meticulous, especially when it comes to police testimony. He reads every line, every report." Calloway let out a short, derisive laugh. "Meticulous? As long as he knows which end of the gavel to bang, we'll be fine. My testimony is ironclad, same as always." "Just be professional, Jack," Reed warned, her eyes darting around the hallway. "He's not a fan of theatrics. Keep it by the book." Meanwhile, in a quiet, sun-lit office far from the main corridor, Judge Marcus Thorne was doing exactly what Reed had described. At 55, with a sprinkle of silver at his temples and a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose, he looked more like a university professor than a man who had spent 20 years as a prosecutor in the state's toughest districts. He'd taken the judgeship 5 years ago, not as a retirement plan, but as a new tool. He'd recently been transferred to the Cedar Creek district specifically to chair a new oversight committee investigating whispers of discriminatory policing and procedural rot within the department. He closed the case file in front of him, the details of Officer Calloway's arrest already raising a dozen red flags. He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He stood and straightened his simple dark gray suit. He wouldn't put on his judicial robes just yet. First, it was time for what his colleagues called his civilian walkthrough. He always entered the courtroom through the public entrance, carrying his briefcase, an hour or so before a session. He preferred to observe the ecosystem of the court before the players knew the judge had arrived. It was amazing what you could learn by being invisible. The bailiff at the door, a man named Henderson, barely grunted as Thorne entered. Two uniformed officers, fresh-faced rookies, snickered as he passed, their eyes tracking his well-worn but expensive leather shoes. Thorne couldn't hear their words, but their dismissive body language was a language he understood fluently. He made a mental note as he walked towards the defense table, the place he always sat to review his notes one last time, a habit from his prosecutor days. He set down his briefcase, the soft click of the latches echoing in the still empty room. He was so focused on the file in his hand, on the inconsistencies in Officer Calloway's report, that he didn't notice the predator had just entered the room and spotted its prey. Calloway saw the black man at the defense table, and an immediate, visceral irritation prickled his skin. Everything about the man felt wrong to him. The quiet confidence in his posture, the way he occupied the space as if he belonged there. His suit was quality, but understated, not the flashy $1,000 armor of the defense attorneys Calloway was used to seeing. He was probably a paralegal, or worse, some green public defender who hadn't learned the unspoken rules of this courthouse yet. Calloway's courthouse. "Court starts in 15, Calloway announced, his voice booming artificially in the quiet room as he swaggered towards the table. "Defense table needs to be clear for the actual attorneys." Thorne didn't look up from the papers spread before him. "I'm aware of the schedule, thank you," he replied, his voice calm and even. The lack of immediate deference was like a splash of gasoline on Calloway's simmering fire. He stopped directly in front of the table, his large frame casting a shadow over Thorne's documents. "You're not listening to me. This area is for authorized personnel only. So unless you've got a law degree you're hiding, I suggest you move it to the gallery where you belong." Thorne finally lifted his head, his gaze meeting Calloway's. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet, assessing intelligence that Calloway found infuriating. "I assure you," Thorne said slowly, "I am authorized to be here." The officer's face hardened into a mask of contempt. "Oh, you are? Let me see some ID then. Prove it." "I don't believe that's necessary." Just then, Evelyn Reed hurried into the courtroom, sensing the atmospheric pressure drop. "Jack, what are you doing? We need to prepare." "1 second, Ev," Calloway snapped, holding up a hand to silence her without breaking his stare down with Thorne. "Just making sure our janitorial staff understands courtroom protocol." The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly. He turned his full attention back to Thorne. "Last chance, pal. Move to the gallery or show me some credentials. Your choice." Thorne slowly rose to his feet, matching Calloway's height. He was leaner, but there was an undeniable strength in his bearing. "Officer, I would suggest you focus your energy on preparing for your testimony, rather than policing the courtroom seating arrangements." The familiarity stunned Calloway for a second. "How do you know I'm an officer?" he asked, his hand instinctively dropping to rest near the butt of his holstered pistol. "Your badge is visible," Thorne replied evenly, his eyes flicking down to the polished metal on Calloway's belt. "And you carry yourself with the unfortunate arrogance I've come to associate with a certain kind of officer." Evelyn Reed inhaled sharply, a tiny, strangled sound. "Jack, let's go. Now." Calloway ignored her. He stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space until mere inches separated them. The smell of stale coffee and cheap aftershave washed over Thorne. "You got a problem with law enforcement, friend?" he growled, his voice dropping to a menacing low. Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't back away. "I have a problem with anyone who mistakes their badge for a crown." The air between them crackled. It was a tangible thing, a humming energy field of pure animosity. The few people who had begun to trickle into the courtroom, clerks, other lawyers, a paralegal, all slowed their pace, sensing the confrontation like animals sensing an earthquake. The court clerk, a woman named Martha who had seen everything, took one look at the standoff, her eyes wide with alarm, and quickly backed out of the room, whispering urgently to the bailiff outside. "You know what? I don't have time for this crap," Calloway spat, his patience finally snapping. With a sudden, violent motion, he reached out and grabbed the handle of Thorne's briefcase. With a flick of his powerful wrist, Calloway yanked the briefcase off the table. The old latch, not designed for such violence, gave way with a sad little pop. The contents of Marcus Thorne's life exploded across the polished linoleum floor. Legal briefs, handwritten notes, laminated case law, and a simple silver-framed photograph of his wife and 2 daughters. The photo skittered across the floor, coming to rest face down under the front bench of the gallery. "Jack," Evelyn Reed hissed, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. "Stop this right now." Thorne remained preternaturally calm, but inside, a cold, precise rage was beginning to crystallize. "Officer," he said, his voice dangerously level, "you are now interfering with official court documents." Calloway scoffed, the sound echoing in the now silent courtroom. "Court documents? Right. And I'm the Queen of England." He used the toe of his polished boot to scatter the fallen papers further, a deliberate act of desecration. He then gave the family photo a little kick, sending it sliding further into the shadows. The main courtroom doors swung open, and the usual morning crowd of attorneys, defendants, and spectators began to file in. The normal pre-court chatter, a low hum of whispered conversations and rustling papers, died instantly. They froze, a gallery of wax figures, their eyes locked on the tableau at the front of the court. The towering, sneering officer, the scattered papers, and the calm, composed black man standing amidst the mess. Everyone knew something was terribly wrong. "Pick them up," Calloway ordered, pointing a thick finger at the papers on the floor. His voice was loud now, a public pronouncement for the benefit of the growing audience. Thorne didn't move a muscle. A slow, incredulous smile spread across Calloway's face. "Oh, no, 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 no. You don't get to say no to me." He stepped closer again, lowering his voice back to a venomous whisper. I said, "Pick them up." Bailiff Henderson, a portly man just 2 years from retirement, finally approached, his face slick with sweat. "Officer Calloway, maybe. Maybe you should just step back." "Stay out of this, Henderson," Calloway snapped without taking his eyes off Thorne. "This man is disrupting court procedure. He needs to be taught a lesson about respect." Thorne took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing the tense air deep into his lungs. "What you're doing, officer, has nothing to do with procedure. It has to do with prejudice." "Kneel down and pick up your mess," Calloway demanded, his voice rising to a shout again, ensuring everyone in the rapidly filling courtroom could hear. The crowd watched in a state of suspended, uncomfortable silence. A young woman in the back row, a journalism student, discreetly raised her phone and began recording. Thorne stood his ground, a granite statue of defiance. "I will not." The words, spoken quietly, landed like thunderclaps. Calloway moved with the sudden, shocking speed of a striking snake. He grabbed Thorne's shoulder, his fingers digging into the fine wool of the suit jacket, and shoved downward with all his weight. I said, "Kneel." Thorne, caught off balance, resisted, but Calloway's bulk and leverage were too much. He was forced down to one knee, the impact jarring his bones. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." "There we go," Calloway said, a sneer of triumph twisting his lips. He released his grip. "Now collect your things and get out of my courtroom before I arrest you for trespassing." Evelyn Reed stepped forward, her face pale. "Jack, for God's sake, what is wrong with you?" "What?" Calloway shot back, turning to her and gesturing wildly at the kneeling Thorne. "He was disrespecting the court. I'm just doing my job." While still on one knee, Thorne calmly and deliberately reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Calloway's instincts, honed by years of street encounters, took over. He instantly seized Thorne's wrist, twisting it painfully. "Hands where I can see them!" he barked, his voice a guttural command. "I'm reaching for my identification," Thorne explained, his voice strained but steady, despite the white-hot pain shooting up his arm. "Sure you are," Calloway grunted, expertly twisting Thorne's arm further up his back in a classic pain compliance hold. "Maybe a night in a holding cell will teach you some manners." The bailiff, Henderson, finally found his courage and intervened more forcefully. "Officer, that's enough. I'm telling you to stand down." "Cuff him," Calloway ordered Henderson, maintaining his painful grip on Thorne. "Obstruction of justice and resisting an officer." Henderson hesitated, his eyes darting between the furious Calloway and the kneeling, restrained Thorne. The conflict on his face was agonizing. The courtroom had fallen into a silence so profound it was almost deafening, the kind of absolute stillness that precedes a catastrophe. And then, from the back of the room, a voice, calm and authoritative, sliced through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "Mr. Henderson, what time is it?" The court clerk, Martha, who had returned to the doorway, looked at the source of the voice with a startled expression. She glanced at her watch. It's 9:27, Your Honor." A wave of confusion, then dawning comprehension, swept through the courtroom. All eyes turned from the drama at the front to the main judicial entrance. Standing there, framed in the doorway, was Chief Judge Elena Ramirez. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her black judicial robes seemed to absorb the light, radiating an aura of absolute authority. Her face was carved from granite. "Release that man immediately, officer," she commanded, her voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of power. Calloway hesitated for a split second, his mind struggling to process the command, but the lifetime of ingrained departmental hierarchy was too strong. He released Thorne and stepped back. "Judge Ramirez," he began, his voice suddenly sounding reedy and unsure. "This individual was—" "That individual," Judge Ramirez interrupted, her voice cutting like a shard of glass, "is Judge Marcus Thorne. He is the presiding judge in this courtroom today." The color drained from Jack Calloway's face. It was as if someone had pulled a plug, and all the blood, all the bravado, all the arrogant certainty rushed out of him, leaving behind a pale, sagging mask of shock. Judge Thorne rose slowly to his feet. With immense dignity, he adjusted the cuff of his shirt, straightened his suit jacket, and smoothed his tie. Not one word, not a single glance in Calloway's direction. Just a series of precise, controlled, deliberate movements that screamed composure in the face of chaos. "Your Honor," Ramirez addressed Thorne, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Do you require a recess?" Thorne shook his head, his composure absolute. "That will not be necessary, Chief Judge. Thank you." Ramirez gave a single, sharp nod. "Very well. Officer Calloway, you will remain in this courtroom. I expect a full and detailed report of this incident on my desk by noon." She turned and exited as quietly as she had appeared, leaving a stunned, echoing silence in her wake. Thorne then walked calmly, not to the gallery, not to the defense table, but directly toward the judge's bench. He ascended the 3 steps, his back straight, every eye in the room following his path. He gestured for the bailiff, Henderson, to follow him into the chambers behind the bench. Before disappearing, he turned to the court. "This court will take a 10-minute recess. Inside the private sanctuary of his chambers, the door clicked shut, and for the first time, Marcus Thorne allowed the mask to slip. His hands, which had been so steady moments before, began to tremble. It was a fine, barely perceptible tremor, the physical manifestation of the monumental effort of self-control. He sat down heavily behind the large mahogany desk and took several deep, shuddering breaths, trying to slow the jackhammer pounding of his heart. The grand wall clock ticked, each second landing like a hammer blow in the silence. The adrenaline that had flooded his system, sharpening his senses and fueling his defiance, was now leaving him feeling shaky and raw. He closed his eyes, replaying the sequence of events, the sneer, the scattered papers, the kick to his family's photograph, the crushing weight on his shoulder, the wrenching of his arm. He allowed the rage to wash over him, to burn through him, and then he let it go. Rage was a fuel, but it wasn't a tool. What he needed now were tools. Finally, he picked up his private cell phone and dialed a number from memory. "Gerald, it's Marcus. I need you to do something for me, and I need it done quietly and fast." His voice was steady again, the tremor gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I need everything you can find on an Officer Jack Calloway. Yes, Cedar Creek Precinct. I want commendations, complaints, internal reviews, use of force reports, everything. I want you to use the priority access codes for the Oversight Committee." The bailiff, Henderson, knocked timidly and entered. "Your Honor, are you all right? Should I call for someone?" His face was ashen. "I'm fine, Henderson, thank you," Thorne said, cutting him off gently. "But I would like you to do two things for me. First, contact Internal Affairs. Quietly. Tell them I want all of Officer Calloway's arrest records for the past 5 years pulled, with a specific focus on cases involving minority suspects. Second," Thorne added, his eyes locking with the bailiff's, "I want all courthouse security footage from all angles for the past 2 hours preserved and delivered to my office. All of it. Understand?" Henderson nodded, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "Right away, sir." Alone again, Thorne opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he typed a brief, encrypted email to the state's Judicial Review Board. It wasn't a formal complaint. Not yet. It was a notification, a quiet flag planted in the system, noting a potential pattern of behavior that warranted a much deeper, wider investigation. He then stood and walked to the small closet where his judicial robe hung. He slid his arms into the sleeves, the familiar weight of the heavy black fabric settling over his shoulders. It felt different today. It felt heavier, but it was a grounding weight, a reminder of his duty, his oath. In the small mirror on the back of the door, Thorne studied his own reflection. It was the same face Calloway had looked at with such unvarnished contempt, the same face he had ordered to kneel. But now, it was framed by the undeniable symbols of judicial authority. "This isn't about you, Marcus," he whispered to his reflection. "This is about every person who didn't have a robe to put on. It's for everyone who couldn't fight back." He straightened his collar, made a silent, solemn vow to remain impartial in the case before him, despite what had just transpired, and walked toward the courtroom door. As his hand reached for the handle, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Gerald. "Initial search complete. Found 16 prior excessive force complaints against Calloway, all dismissed. You're not the first, Marcus. Not by a long shot." When Judge Marcus Thorne re-entered the courtroom, now in full judicial regalia, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The hushed whispers ceased. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, charged with anticipation. He took his seat at the bench, the high-backed leather chair feeling like a throne, and looked down upon the room. Officer Calloway was standing awkwardly at the prosecution table, his face still pale. Evelyn Reed was whispering urgently in his ear, her expression a mixture of panic and fury. "This court is now in session," Thorne announced, his voice amplified by the microphone, carrying a clear, resonant authority that filled every corner of the room. "The State of Cedar Creek versus Kendrick Davis. Possession with intent to distribute." He proceeded with the day's business as if nothing had happened, reviewing preliminary matters, addressing the attorneys with crisp professionalism. Calloway shifted his weight from foot to foot, his eyes refusing to meet the judge's gaze. A single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. When the time came for the prosecution to present its first witness, Thorne looked directly at Calloway. "The state calls Officer Jack Calloway to the stand." Calloway walked to the witness box, his usual swagger completely gone. "Officer, you are sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this courtroom. Do you understand this solemn obligation?" Thorne asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Calloway cleared his throat, his own voice sounding foreign to him. "Yes, Your Honor." "Proceed with your testimony regarding the defendant's arrest." Calloway began to recount the events of the arrest, describing how he had found a significant quantity of drugs in the defendant's car during a routine traffic stop. But his usual confident, booming delivery was gone. Under Thorne's unwavering analytical gaze, his answers grew shorter, his narrative less certain. He felt like an insect under a microscope. "You stated you stopped the defendant's vehicle for what reason, officer?" Thorne interjected, his pen scratching against a legal pad. "A broken taillight, Your Honor. And was your dash camera in operation during this traffic stop?" Calloway hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "There was an equipment malfunction that day, Your Honor." Thorne made a note. "Interesting. And your body camera? Was it also malfunctioning, sir?" Calloway's collar suddenly felt 2 sizes too small. "Yes, Your Honor. Both cameras failed simultaneously." Thorne's tone remained perfectly neutral, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. At the defense table, the public defender, a young, usually timid man named Peterson, perked up, sensing a shift in the currents. "It happens more than you'd think," Calloway added, a hint of his old defiance creeping back into his voice. Thorne turned his gaze from the witness to the defense table. "Mr. Peterson, your cross-examination." The young defense attorney stood, emboldened by the judge's line of questioning. He felt as though he'd been thrown a lifeline. "Officer Calloway, in your 5 years as the precinct's top arresting officer, can you estimate how many of your arrests have involved simultaneous camera malfunctions?" "Objection," Evelyn Reed called out, rising to her feet. "Relevance?" "Goes to a potential pattern of behavior and directly impacts the witness's credibility in this specific case, Your Honor," Peterson countered, his voice surprisingly firm. Thorne steepled his fingers, considering for a moment that felt like an eternity to Calloway. "Overruled. The officer will answer the question." Calloway's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. "I don't keep track of departmental equipment issues." "Allow me to rephrase," Peterson pressed, picking up a document from his table. "How many of your arrests of minority suspects in the past 2 years have involved camera malfunctions?" The defendant, Kendrick Davis, a young black man who had been staring at his hands with an air of hopeless resignation, now looked up at Calloway. For the first time since the trial began, a flicker of something, not yet hope, but maybe the possibility of it, crossed his face. "Your Honor," Evelyn Reed said, standing abruptly, "may we approach the bench?" At the bench, out of earshot of the jury and the gallery, Reed spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. "Judge Thorne, with all due respect, the defense is on a fishing expedition, attempting to manufacture a racial bias angle where none exists." Thorne regarded her with his calm, unreadable expression. "Ms. Reed, are you suggesting that questioning the reliability and functionality of police equipment used during an arrest the very equipment intended to ensure procedural integrity, is inappropriate? No, Your Honor, of course not. But the clear implication is that Officer Calloway specifically targets minorities and then ensures there is no record. I have made no such implication, nor has the defense yet, Thorne interrupted, his voice a soft but unyielding force. I am simply allowing a relevant line of questioning regarding the collection, or lack thereof, of evidence. The jury can draw its own conclusions. Calloway, unable to contain himself, stepped forward to join them at the bench, uninvited. This is a simple, open and shut drug case, and they're turning it into a circus. Thorne's gaze shifted slowly, deliberately, to Calloway. The temperature at the bench seemed to drop 20 degrees. Officer, you will approach this bench when you are called. Not before. Return to the witness stand. Calloway, flushed with anger and humiliation, didn't move. With all due respect, Your Honor, he said, his voice tight with insubordination. I've testified in hundreds of cases. I know harassment when I see it. The muscle in Judge Thorne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It was the only outward sign of the pressure building within him. Officer Calloway, he said, his voice now dangerously quiet. Step back from this bench immediately, or I will have you removed from my courtroom and held in contempt. Calloway held his ground for 3 long, defiant seconds, a silent battle of wills playing out in front of the chief judge, before finally turning and stalking back to his seat, muttering something under his breath. What was that, officer? Thorne asked, his voice suddenly sharp and clear, ringing through the silent courtroom. Calloway froze. Nothing, Your Honor. Speak clearly for the record if you have something you wish to add to the proceedings. Calloway turned, his face a mask of rage, and looked directly at Judge Thorne, breaking the last taboo. I said this feels personal, Your Honor. A collective gasp and a ripple of whispers moved through the gallery. The court reporter's fingers, which had been flying across her stenotype machine, paused for a stunned moment. Thorne leaned forward into his microphone, his voice resonating with a cold, hard clarity. Justice is always personal, officer. It is personal to the accused who faces the loss of their liberty. It is personal to the victim who seeks redress. And it is personal to the community that relies on this court for fairness. What justice must never be, however, is prejudiced. He turned his attention back to the defense attorney. Continue your cross-examination, Mr. Peterson. Peterson, now operating with a newfound surge of confidence, produced a statistical report. Officer, are you aware that in this district, where Black and Latino individuals comprise 23% of the population, they account for 78% of your drug-related arrests over the past 3 years? Evelyn Reed was on her feet again. Objection! These statistics haven't been authenticated or entered into evidence. We submitted them to the prosecution during discovery last month, Your Honor, Peterson countered smoothly. Thorne glanced down at the report, which had been included in his pre-trial briefing. I'll allow the question. The data is a matter of public record. Officer Calloway, please answer. Calloway's face was now a blotchy, angry red. I police high-crime areas. I go where the crime is. So, you would deny that there is any bias whatsoever in your arrest patterns? I arrest criminals. Period, Calloway spat. If certain groups happen to commit more crimes. The gallery erupted in a chorus of murmurs and angry muttering. The defendant's mother, a woman in the second row, let out a small cry and covered her mouth in shock. Thorne's gavel came down with a single, sharp, deafening crack that silenced the entire room in an instant. The courtroom fell so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Calloway's expression hardened into a defiant glare as he met the judge's unblinking gaze. The air was thick, electric with the unspoken challenge that had just been laid bare for all to see. To clarify my previous statement for the court, Calloway said, his voice stiff and formal, I enforce the law equally, without regard to race, creed, or color. Judge Thorne studied him, his expression impassive. Then you should have no objection to the defense further examining your arrest record for any statistical patterns. My record speaks for itself, Calloway shot back. Highest conviction rate in the department for 5 years straight. Convictions that are based on evidence obtained through proper, verifiable procedure, Thorne clarified, his voice like velvet over steel. Which brings us back to the rather convenient equipment failures that occurred during Mr. Davis's arrest. The defense attorney, Peterson, produced another document with a theatrical flourish. Your Honor, we have compiled a list of the 47 instances in the past 2 years where Officer Calloway reported simultaneous body and dash camera malfunctions during an arrest. In 41 of those cases, that's 87%, the suspect was a minority. Calloway shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. This is a character assassination. It's a smear job. Sit down, officer, Thorne ordered, his voice calm but absolute. You're allowing them to twist statistics to fit their own biased narrative, Calloway protested, remaining on his feet, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. Thorne's voice dropped, becoming even quieter, yet somehow more menacing. I am allowing relevant evidence to be presented in this court of law. This is your final warning, officer. Sit down. Calloway reluctantly complied, sinking into his chair with a frustrated sigh that radiated defiance. The trial had become a cage, and he was the one on display. Defense may continue, Thorne said, turning his attention back to Peterson. Officer, in this specific arrest of Mr. Davis, you testified that you initiated the search of his vehicle after noting the broken tail light. Is that correct? That's exactly how it happened, Calloway lied. Peterson signaled to an assistant, who wheeled a small television monitor to face the jury box. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we would like to play a short video. Objection, Evelyn Reed called out, a note of desperation in her voice. This video was not provided during discovery. That's because the Cedar Creek Police Department officially claimed no such video existed, Peterson retorted. We were forced to canvass the area ourselves and obtained this security footage from a nearby business just last week. Thorne examined the timestamp on the video file. Ms. Reed, was the prosecution aware of this footage? Reed hesitated, her professional ethics warring with her desire to protect her star witness. No, Your Honor, we were not. Thorne turned his gaze back to Calloway, who was now staring at the dark screen with a look of dawning horror. Officer, you testified under oath that a traffic violation prompted your search. This video appears to suggest otherwise. The video began to play. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but the sequence of events was unmistakable. It clearly showed Calloway's cruiser pulling over the defendant's car. It then showed Calloway immediately approaching the driver's side, opening the door, and beginning his search of the vehicle. Only after several minutes of searching did he walk to the back of the car, look at the tail light, and then return to his cruiser to write the citation. Calloway glared at Judge Thorne, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. With all due respect, Your Honor, a distant, grainy security camera doesn't show the full context of the situation. And what context? Thorne asked, his voice dangerously soft. Would possibly justify contradicting your own sworn testimony. Kendrick Davis, the defendant, leaned forward, his eyes wide, a tear tracing a path through the fear on his face. It was the tear of a man who had been drowning and had just seen the surface. Calloway stood up again, his chair tipping over behind him, and pointed a trembling finger at the judge. You've been gunning for me since the moment I walked into this courtroom. Officer Calloway, Thorne's voice cut through the ensuing uproar like a blade. You are in contempt of this court. Calloway didn't back down. He was a cornered animal, lashing out. This whole trial is a sham, a setup. You were planning this ambush from the moment you sat at that defense table, pretending to be some nobody. I never pretended to be anything other than what I am, Thorne responded, his voice rising, finally allowing a sliver of his own cold fury to show. You, officer, are the one who made assumptions based on nothing more than the color of my skin. He let the words hang in the air for a moment, a stark and damning indictment. You deliberately misled me by doing what? By being a black man in a courthouse? Thorne's composure, so carefully maintained, finally cracked. He stood, his full height, and the authority of his office creating an intimidating presence. Bailiff, remove Officer Calloway from my courtroom. As Henderson approached cautiously, Evelyn Reed shot to her feet. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a brief recess to get this situation under control. Granted, Thorne snapped. 15 minutes. He then pointed a finger not at Calloway, but at the door to his chambers. Officer Calloway, in my chambers, now. The moment the heavy oak door of the judge's chambers clicked shut, Calloway began to pace like a caged tiger, his face flushed a deep mottled red. His tie was loosened, and a vein pulsed violently at his temple. Judge Thorne, in stark contrast, sat calmly behind his expansive desk, his hands steepled, the picture of collected, icy composure. You have compromised this entire case, officer, Thorne said, his voice low and even. Me? Calloway spun around, his voice dripping with disbelief. You set me up. You orchestrated this whole thing for public humiliation. Thorne opened a thick folder on his desk, the one his contact, Gerald, had sent over. Jack Calloway, 25 years on the force. 16 formal complaints of excessive force filed against you, all of them dismissed by internal review. 92% of your drug-related arrests involve minority suspects, in a district that is only 23% minority. In 43% of your evidence submissions, there are significant documentation issues or procedural irregularities. He looked up from the folder, his eyes locking onto Calloway's. Did I miss anything? The blustering rage seemed to drain out of Calloway, replaced by a cold dread. He stopped pacing. Where did you get that information? I've had it for weeks, Thorne revealed, the first piece of the puzzle clicking into place for the disgraced officer. I am not just a recently transferred judge, officer. I was sent to this district to chair the new Judicial Oversight Committee on discriminatory policing practices. Your name, Officer Calloway, has come up, repeatedly. The last bit of color fled from Calloway's face. He looked like a ghost. This is a witch hunt. No, Thorne corrected him calmly. This is accountability. Today was not part of any plan. As I told you, I regularly observe my courtroom's dynamics before a session begins. Your deplorable behavior this morning merely confirmed what your disturbing record has long suggested. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. The bailiff entered, followed by Chief Judge Ramirez, and, to Calloway's horror, Police Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Davis, a stern, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with a crisp uniform and a chest full of commendations, fixed Calloway with a look of profound disappointment. Officer, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. On what grounds? Calloway demanded, a pathetic flicker of his old defiance returning. Assaulting a judge in his own courtroom, for starters, Davis responded icily, followed by what appears to be falsifying testimony under oath and potential long-term evidence tampering, based on the revelations in court today. You can't do this, Calloway protested weakly. 25 years of service? Makes it infinitely worse, not better. Davis cut him off. You, of all people, should know better. She turned to Judge Thorne. Judge, my department has already initiated a comprehensive review of all of Officer Calloway's active cases and past convictions. We will get to the bottom of this. Thorne nodded. The Oversight Committee will cooperate fully with your investigation, Commissioner. We will also be examining the entire chain of command and the supervisory culture that allowed this pattern of behavior to continue unchecked for so long. This goes beyond one bad apple, Chief Judge Ramirez added, her voice grim. We will be looking at departmental training, the internal affairs process, and the accountability measures that have clearly failed this community. Calloway looked from one powerful face to another, the true scope of his predicament finally dawning on him. You're using me, he whispered. You're making me the scapegoat for systemic problems. No, officer, Thorne replied, his voice devoid of pity. You are facing the direct consequences of your own specific actions. The system that enabled you for far too long will now face its own reckoning. He turned his attention to the commissioner. This morning, before the trial, Officer Calloway physically assaulted me in open court. He used racial intimidation tactics and attempted to humiliate me publicly. I want formal charges filed against him. Davis nodded curtly. Already in process, Your Honor. Calloway let out a bitter, desperate laugh. So that's it? 25 years down the drain because you got your feelings hurt? No, Thorne said, standing up from behind his desk. 25 years down the drain because you consistently and unapologetically abused your authority, all while believing you would never, ever face consequences. Today, that ends. Commissioner Davis stepped forward. Officer Calloway, you will surrender your badge and your service weapon to the duty officer at the front desk. You will report to Internal Affairs tomorrow morning at 900 hours. I strongly suggest you contact your attorney. As they were being escorted from the chambers, Calloway leaned towards Thorne, his voice a venomous whisper. You have no idea who you're messing with. News of the explosive confrontation in the Cedar Creek courthouse spread with the speed of a digital wildfire. By mid-afternoon, the journalism student's cell phone video had been leaked to a local news outlet and subsequently went viral online. The grainy footage of Calloway forcing a kneeling Thorne to the ground, followed by the stunning reveal of Thorne's identity, was everywhere. The hashtag #ArcJudgeNeil was trending nationally. Cable news channels ran the clip on an endless loop, with pundits and legal analysts offering breathless commentary. In an emergency session convened in a stuffy, overheated conference room, the executives of the police union debated their strategy. Tensions were running high. We have to cut him loose, Union President Frank Taylor argued, slamming his pen on the table. This video is indefensible. There is no spin for this. Vice President Mike Harding, a staunch traditionalist, pushed back. We abandon one of our own. We set a dangerous precedent. We stand by our officers. Period. He forced a sitting judge to his knees and publicly humiliated him, Mike, Taylor countered, his voice rising. It's on camera, in a courtroom full of witnesses. We can't defend the indefensible. Then we pivot, another representative suggested. We frame it as a mental health issue. Job stress, PTSD from decades of service, a momentary lapse in judgment. Taylor shook his head wearily. The new Oversight Committee has his entire jacket. If we try to play this off as a one-time incident, they'll bury us with the 16 prior complaints. We'll look like fools. Meanwhile, District Attorney Evelyn Reed was facing a crisis of her own. Her office was being inundated with motions from defense attorneys to review every single case that had ever involved Officer Jack Calloway. Her phone rang incessantly. She rubbed her throbbing temples as her deputy delivered another stack of files to her desk. We're looking at potentially hundreds of tainted convictions, Evelyn, her deputy warned, his voice grave. A significant number of them involving minority defendants who took plea deals rather than risk facing Calloway on the stand. Reed sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. pull every single case he ever touched, form a review committee, prioritize anyone who is currently incarcerated based on his testimony or evidence. Her assistant appeared in the doorway, her face pale. The press is lined up in the lobby. They're demanding a statement. Tell them we are conducting a thorough and transparent review of all potentially affected cases and that our office is unequivocally committed to justice, Reed replied, the boilerplate words tasting like ash in her mouth. And get me the Kendrick Davis file from this morning. I want to drop those charges immediately. Across town, Judge Thorne was meeting with the full Judicial Oversight Committee. 12 judges from various districts were gathered around a large conference table, reviewing the morning's events with a mixture of shock and grim determination. Outside the large windows, a steady rain began to fall, streaking the glass and mirroring the somber mood in the room. "What happened to you today was an outrage, Marcus," said Judge Garcia, a veteran of the bench. "But it has also given us an unprecedented opportunity, a leverage point for the kind of real reform we've been trying to achieve for years." Thorne nodded. "I don't want this to be about one officer's badge. I want systemic changes." The police commissioner has already agreed, in principle, to an independent civilian review of their training protocols and use of force policies, added Judge Reynolds. "And I just got off the phone with the city council president. They are fast-tracking a proposal for mandatory body cameras with tamper-proof automatic cloud uploads for every officer in the department." "What about the mayor?" Thorne asked. "Without executive buy-in, these reforms will die on the vine." Chief Judge Ramirez spoke up. "She called me personally less than an hour ago. That video has shaken her. She's facing immense pressure from community leaders and civil rights groups. She will back us, unequivocally." At police headquarters, Commissioner Davis addressed a tense, silent room full of her precinct captains. Their faces were grim as they began to absorb the far-reaching implications of the day's events. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, her voice firm. "Officer Calloway did not develop these attitudes in a vacuum. Every supervisor who signed off on a questionable report, every partner who witnessed misconduct and chose to stay silent, every IA officer who buried a complaint, you are all now under review." Captain Bennett, a 30-year veteran, spoke up. "Commissioner, with all due respect, one officer's terrible mistake shouldn't be used to tarnish this entire department." "This is not about one incident, Captain," Davis corrected him sharply. "The Oversight Committee has identified statistically significant anomalies in arrest patterns and use of force incidents across multiple precincts. Judge Thorne's horrifying experience simply put a human face on the cold, hard data." She projected a series of charts and graphs onto the screen behind her. They showed disproportionate arrest rates, search rates, and citation rates for minority citizens. The pattern was undeniable and damning. In his suburban home, Jack Calloway sat in his armchair, the television playing on mute. He watched the footage of his own downfall over and over again. A few fellow officers had stopped by to offer support, but far fewer than he would have expected. His phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, which his union rep had advised him to ignore. When his former partner, Officer Wilson, arrived, Calloway finally vented his mounting frustration. "They're making me the fall guy for standard procedure," he complained, pouring himself a tumbler of whiskey. "Don't tell me you never profiled a suspect or bent a rule to get a conviction." Wilson shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. "Look, Jack, IA interviewed me this afternoon. They asked me about that Martinez arrest from last year." "So? We did everything by the book on that one." Wilson finally looked at him, his eyes full of a weary resignation. "We both know that's not true, Jack. And I've got a family to think about, a pension to protect." Calloway stared at him, disbelief warring with fury. "You're throwing me under the bus." "I'm not going down with you, Jack," Wilson said quietly, heading for the door. "And from what I'm hearing, neither are the others." The next morning, Judge Thorne presided over a special hearing in the case of the state versus Kendrick Davis. The courtroom was packed to the gills with reporters, community activists, and curious citizens. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, a stark contrast to the gloom of the previous day. In light of new evidence suggesting improper search and seizure procedures, as well as potentially falsified testimony by the arresting officer, Thorne announced, his voice ringing with authority, all charges against Mr. Kendrick Davis are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Davis, who had sat silently beside his public defender, broke down, weeping openly as his attorney put a comforting hand on his shoulder. In the second row, his mother sobbed into her hands, her prayers answered. Furthermore, Thorne continued, his voice rising, I am ordering an immediate judicial review of all past convictions in this district that relied primarily on the testimony of Officer Jack Calloway, particularly where similar search procedures were employed or where equipment malfunctions were reported. Outside, on the courthouse steps, a swarm of reporters engulfed Thorne as he exited. He had avoided the media until now, but he recognized this was a crucial moment to frame the narrative. Judge Thorne, will you be pursuing personal assault charges against Officer Calloway? A reporter shouted. Thorne stepped up to the microphones. This was never about me, and it was never just about Officer Calloway. This is about ensuring equal justice under the law for every single citizen of this community. The system failed, not just in this one case, but in potentially hundreds of others that we are now committed to reviewing. But what about accountability for what he did to you? Another reporter called out. Real accountability isn't just about punishing one individual, Thorne replied, his voice carrying over the crowd. It's about fundamentally reforming the procedures and dismantling the culture that allowed these abuses to continue, unchecked, for years. That is the work that begins today. And so it began. The following week brought a dizzying cascade of changes. Police headquarters announced a complete overhaul of its training protocols, with a new emphasis on de-escalation and implicit bias training. The mayor, making good on her promise, signed an executive order creating a new civilian oversight board with genuine subpoena power. Body camera malfunctions mysteriously dropped to near zero levels as officers realized the new system was being independently monitored. In the DA's office, prosecutors began proactively reviewing and dismissing cases with even a hint of questionable evidence from certain officers. It was a sea change. In community centers and church basements across the city, citizens gathered for town hall meetings, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to a cautious, fragile hope. We've heard promises of reform before, a local pastor said at one such meeting. But this time feels different. This time, it feels like someone with power finally experienced what our sons and brothers have been experiencing for generations. As Thorne left a press conference announcing the new reforms, his phone buzzed with alerts. 3 other counties in the state were now moving to create their own judicial oversight committees, modeled on his. 1 week later, a pale and gaunt Jack Calloway sat before the police disciplinary board. His once crisp uniform seemed to hang loosely on his now slumped frame. Dark circles ringed his eyes. The hearing room was formal and airless, its wood-paneled walls seeming to close in on him. Commissioner Davis presided over the hearing. Former Officer Calloway, she began, you face administrative charges of assault, evidence tampering, perjury, and multiple civil rights violations. How do you plead? Not guilty, Calloway mumbled, his voice a hollow echo of its former self. The evidence presented was overwhelming. Internal affairs. Captain Hernandez projected statistical analyses of Calloway's arrest patterns, his impossible rate of equipment malfunctions, and his disproportionate use of force. The board then viewed the viral cell phone footage, followed by the crystal-clear courthouse security footage. Calloway couldn't bring himself to watch. He stared at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. When called to testify, he attempted a feeble justification. I saw an individual I did not recognize in a restricted area. In today's high-threat environment, I acted on instinct to protect the court." Commissioner Davis leaned forward. "You protected the court by forcing a man in a suit to kneel and clean up papers you yourself had scattered?" "Things escalated," Calloway insisted, "but there was no racial motivation." "And yet you referred to Judge Thorne as pal and friend in a clearly condescending manner, forced him to his knees in a posture of submission, and later testified in open court that you believe certain groups commit more crimes. Is that not correct?" Calloway fell silent. His attorney tried a different tactic. "My client has an exemplary record of arrests, 25 years of taking dangerous criminals off our streets." "And at what cost?" Davis shot back. "We have so far identified 63 cases where evidence was likely obtained improperly or misrepresented in court. As of this morning, 17 people have been released from prison pending a full review of their wrongful convictions. The hearing dragged on for hours. Finally, the board deliberated. When Calloway was recalled, he stood stiffly as Commissioner Davis delivered the unanimous decision. "Officer James Calloway, this board finds overwhelming and irrefutable evidence of a long-standing pattern of misconduct, bias, and a profound abuse of authority. Your employment with the Cedar Creek Police Department is terminated, effective immediately. Your pension and all benefits are hereby revoked. The criminal charges against you will proceed through the district attorney's office." Calloway's face remained a blank, expressionless mask. "I served this city for 25 years, he whispered. "No," Davis corrected him, her voice cold. "You served yourself while wearing our badge. You will turn in your gun and shield before you leave this building." As Calloway exited police headquarters for the last time, a disgraced and broken man, a mob of reporters surrounded him, their camera flashes blinding him. Microphones were thrust in his face. From the windows above, his former colleagues watched, their expressions ranging from pity to disgust. As he pushed through the crowd, a hand touched his shoulder. He turned to see a young Latino man he had arrested 3 years prior, a man who had been exonerated and released just last week. The man said nothing. He just looked at Calloway, his eyes filled not with hate, but with a quiet, devastating sorrow. What would you have done in Judge Thorne's situation? Could you have remained that calm in the face of such blatant disrespect and aggression? Let us know your honest thoughts in the comments below. And while you're there, if you're enjoying this story of justice served, please hit that like button. It truly helps our channel grow. Now, let's see how one man's stand truly changed a city. 1 year later, Judge William Thorne sat in his chambers, the late afternoon sun casting long, striped shadows across his desk. A knock at the door interrupted his review of a case file. "Come in," he called. The door opened and Kendrick Davis entered. The young man whose life had been saved in that courtroom was now dressed in a well-fitted suit, a constitutional law textbook tucked under his arm. "Your Honor," he said, a broad smile on his face. "Thank you for seeing me." Thorne smiled back warmly. "Mr. Davis, it's good to see you. How are your first-year studies at the university?" "Challenging, sir, but incredibly rewarding," Davis said, taking the offered seat. "I still can't quite believe I'm preparing for the LSATs instead of serving a 10-year sentence." "Your experience has given you a perspective that most lawyers will never have," Thorne observed. "You will be a tremendous asset to the profession." "That's actually why I came, sir," Davis said. "I'm writing a paper on systemic reform for my political science class, and I wanted to ask you, looking back over the past year, what do you think has really changed?" Thorne leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "Well, the statistics tell one story. Excessive force complaints are down over 40%. Community cooperation with police is up. Arrests are down, but so is the crime rate. but the numbers only tell part of it. And the other part? The culture, Thorne explained. The culture is slowly shifting. I see it every day in my courtroom. I see it in the way young officers testify, in the way prosecutors scrutinize evidence, in the way defendants are treated with a baseline of dignity. There's a new awareness, a willingness to question the old ways of doing things. Do you think it will last? Davis asked. Reform is not a destination. It's a constant process, Thorne said. It requires ceaseless vigilance from all of us. The moment we declare victory and become complacent is the moment the old habits begin to creep back in. Before leaving, Davis hesitated at the door. Judge Thorne, can I ask you something personal? Thorne nodded. That day in the courtroom, with Calloway, how did you stay so calm? Weren't you angry? A thoughtful expression crossed Thorne's face. I've faced discrimination and disrespect in various forms my entire life, Mr. Davis, as a law student, as a young prosecutor, and yes, even as a judge. Over time, you develop certain strategies to maintain your dignity and control in the face of ugliness. But the anger? Oh, I was furious, Thorne admitted with a small, wry smile. But I knew that displaying that anger in that moment would have given him all the power. It would have validated his narrative of me as an aggressive, unruly man. My calmness was not an absence of anger. It was a weapon against him. It ensured that what happened next wasn't about a personal vendetta, but about systematic, lasting change. After Davis left, Thorne walked to his courtroom for the afternoon session. He passed Evelyn Reed in the hallway. She was now the respected head of the DA's new Civil Rights Division. Big case this afternoon? She asked. Just routine matters, Thorne replied with a smile. But every case is the most important case in the world to the people involved. As he took his seat at the bench, he looked out over the courtroom and noted the small, meaningful changes, the diversity among the attorneys and court staff, the respectful interactions, the careful attention to procedure. A new officer was testifying in his first case, a young man, nervous but prepared, his body camera prominently displayed on his uniform, his testimony precise and unbiased. Justice, Thorne thought to himself, isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating systems where doing the right thing becomes the easiest, most natural choice for everyone. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just a story, it's a powerful reminder. Silence protects corrupt systems, but courage can rewrite the rules entirely. Here at Beat Stories, we believe in the power of truth to challenge authority. If you want to see more real stories that inspire, shock, and empower, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and have tapped that notification bell. We post new videos every single week, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice depends on brave individuals willing to stand their ground. We'll see you in the next Black Stories.